Hi, Grandma here, and I'm reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and I'm reading chapter 9, halfway through. In my version, it's on 107. If you'll recall, it's Christmas, and Atticus always goes to Finch's Landing, which is where his sister lives. She lives in the ancestral home. I get the idea that Scout is not really that fond of her Aunt Alexandra, not as she is of Uncle Jack. Uncle Jack, who is Atticus's brother, is also with them. There went with the house the usual legend about the Yankees. One Finch female, recently engaged, donned her complete trousseau to save it from raiders in the neighborhood. She became stuck in the door to the daughter's staircase, but was doused with fire and finally pushed through. Now, if you recall, the house looks normal on the outside, but on the inside, there are two separate staircases, one for the boys and the guest, and another staircase for the girls, which is through the parents' bedroom. Anyway, when we arrived at the landing, Aunt Alexandra kissed Uncle Jack. Francis kissed Uncle Jack. Uncle Jimmy shook hands silently with Uncle Jack. Jim and I gave our presents to Francis, who gave us a present. Jim felt his age and gravitated toward the adults, leaving me to entertain our cousin Francis. Francis was 8 and slicked back his hair. "What'd you get for Christmas?" I asked politely. "Just what I asked for," he said, and Francis had requested a pair of knee pants, a red leather book sack, 5 shirts, and an untied bow tie. "That's nice," I lied. "Jim and me got air rifles, and Jim got a chemistry set." "A toy one, I reckon." "No, a real one. He's going to make me some invisible ink, and I'm going to write to Dill with it." Francis asked me, what was the use of that? "Well, can't you just see his face when he gets a letter from me with nothing in it? It'll drive him nuts." Talking to Francis gave me the sensation of settling slowly to the bottom of the ocean. He was the most boring child I ever met. As he lived in Mobile, he could not inform on me to school authorities, but he managed to tell everything he knew to Aunt Alexandra, who in turn unburdened herself to Atticus, who either forgot it or gave me hell, whichever struck his fancy. But the only time I ever heard Atticus speak sharply to anyone was when I once heard him say, "Sister, I do the best I can with him." It had something to do with me going around in overalls. Aunt Alexandra was a fanatical on the subject of my attire. I could not possibly hope to be a lady if I wore breeches, which I said I could do nothing in a dress. She said I wasn't supposed to do things that required pants. Aunt Alexandra's vision of my deportment involved playing with small stoves, tea sets, and wearing the add-a-pearl necklace she gave me when I was born. Furthermore, I should be a ray of sunshine in my father's lonely life. I suggested that one could be a ray of sunshine in pants just as well, but Auntie said that one had to behave like a sunbeam, that I was born good but had grown progressively worse every year. She hurt my feelings and set my teeth permanently on edge. But when I asked Atticus about it, he said there were already enough sunbeams in the family and to go on about my business. He didn't mind me much the way I was. At Christmas dinner, I sat at the little table in the dining room. Jim and Francis sat with the adults in the dining table. Auntie had continued to isolate me long after Jim and Francis graduated to the big table. I often wondered what she thought I'd do. Get up, throw something? I sometimes thought of asking her if she would just let me sit at the big table with the rest of them just once. I would prove to her how civilized I could be. After all, I ate at home every day with no major mishaps. When I begged Atticus to use his influence, he said he had none. We were guests, and we sat where she told us to sit. He also said Aunt Alexandra didn't understand girls much. She'd never had one. But her cooking made up for everything. 3 kinds of meat, summer vegetables from her pantry shelves, peach pickles, 2 kinds of cake, and ambrosia constituted a modest chicken dinner. Afterwards, the adults made for the living room and sat around in a dazed condition. Jem lay on the floor, and I went to the backyard. "Put on your coat," said Atticus dreamily, so I didn't hear him. Frances sat beside me on the back steps. "That was the best yet," I said. "Grandma's a wonderful cook," said Frances. "She's going to teach me how." "Boys don't cook." I giggled at the thought of Jem in an apron. "Grandma says all men should learn to cook, that men ought to be careful with their wives and wait on them when they don't feel good," said my cousin. "Well, I don't want Dill waiting on me," I said. "I'd rather wait on him." "Dill?" "Yeah, don't say anything about it yet, but we're going to get married as soon as we're big enough. He asked me last summer." Frances hooted. "Well, what's the matter with him?" I asked. "Ain't anything the matter with him." "You mean that little runt Grandma says stays with Miss Rachel every summer?" "That's exactly who I mean." "I know all about him," said Frances. "What about him?" "Grandma says he hasn't got a home." "Has to. He lives in Meridian. He just gets passed around from relative to relative, and Miss Rachel keeps him every summer." "Frances, that's not so." Frances grinned at me. "You're mighty dumb sometimes, Jean Louise. Guess you don't know any better, though." "What do you mean?" "If Uncle Atticus lets you run around with stray dogs, that's his own business, like Grandma says, so it ain't your fault. I guess it ain't your fault if Uncle Atticus is a nigger lover besides, but I'm here to tell you it certainly does mortify the rest of the family." "Frances, what in the hell do you mean?" "Just what I said. Grandma says it's bad enough he lets you run around all wild, but he's turned out a nigger lover will never be able to walk the streets and make 'em again. He's ruining the family. That's what he's doing." Frances rose and sprinted down the catwalk to the old kitchen. At a safe distance, he called, "He's nothing but a nigger lover." "He is not!" I roared. "I don't know what you're talking about, but you better cut it out this red-hot minute." I leaped off the steps, ran down the catwalk. It was easy to collar Frances. I said, "Take it back quick." Frances jerked loose, sped into the old kitchen. "Nigger lover," he yelled. When stalking one's prey, it's best to take one's time, say nothing, and as sure as eggs, he will become curious and emerge. Frances appeared at the kitchen door. "You still mad, Jean Louise?" he said tentatively. "Nothing to speak of," I said. Frances came out on the catwalk. "You gonna take it back, Frances?" But I was too quick on the draw. Frances shot back into the kitchen, so I retired to the steps. I could wait patiently. I'd sat there perhaps 5 minutes when I heard Aunt Alexandra speak. "Where's Francis?" "He's out yonder in the kitchen. He knows he's not supposed to play in there." Frances came to the door and yelled, "Grandma, she's got me in here and she won't let me out." "What's all this, Jean Louise?" I looked at Aunt Alexandra. "I haven't got him in there, Auntie. I ain't holding him." "Yes, she is," shouted Frances. "She won't let me out." "Have you all been fussing?" "Jean Louise got mad at me, Grandma," called Frances. "Frances, come out of there. Jean Louise, if I hear another word out of you, I'll tell your father." "Did I hear you say hell a while ago?" "No." "I thought I did. I better not hear that again." Aunt Alexandra was a back porch listener. The moment she was out of sight, Frances came out, head up and grinning. "Don't you fool with me," he said. He jumped into the yard and kept his distance, kicking tufts of grass, turning around occasionally to smile at me. Jim appeared on the porch, looked at us, went away. Francis climbed the mimosa tree, came down, put his hands in his pockets, and strolled around the yard. "Ha!" he said. I asked him who he thought he was. Uncle Jack? Francis said he reckoned I got told. For me to just sit there and leave him alone. "I ain't bothering you," I said. Frances looked at me carefully, concluded that I had been sufficiently subdued, and crooned softly, "Nigger lover." This time, I split my knuckle to the bone on his front tooth. My left impaired, I sailed in with my right, but not for long. Uncle Jack pinned my arms to my sides and said, "Stand still." Aunt Alexandra ministered to Francis, wiping his tears away with her handkerchief, rubbing his hair, patting his cheek. Atticus, Jim, and Uncle Jimmy had come to the back porch when Francis started yelling. "Who started this?" said Uncle Jack. Francis and I pointed at each other. "Grandma," he bawled, "she called me a whore lady and jumped on me." "Is that true, Scout?" said Uncle Jack. "I reckon so." When Uncle Jack looked down at me, his features were like Aunt Alexandra's. "You know I told you you'd get in trouble if you used words like that. I told you, didn't I?" "Yes, sir, but—" "Well, you're in trouble now. Stay there." I was debating whether to stand there or run, and tarried in indecision a moment too long. I turned to flee, but Uncle Jack was quicker. I found myself suddenly looking at a tiny ant struggling with a breadcrumb in the grass. "I'll never speak to you again as long as I live. I hate you and despise you and hope you die tomorrow." A statement that seemed to encourage Uncle Jack more than anything. I ran to Atticus for comfort, but he said I had it coming and it was high time we went home. I climbed into the back seat of the car without saying goodbye to anyone, and at home I ran into my room and slammed the door. Jim tried to say something, but I wouldn't let him. When I surveyed the damage, there were only 7 or 8 red marks on her hand, and I was reflecting upon relativity when someone knocked on the door. I asked who it was. Uncle Jack answered. "Go away." Uncle Jack said if I talked like that, he'd lick me again, so I was quiet. When he entered the room, I retreated to a corner and turned my back on him. "Scout," he said, "do you still hate me?" "Go on, please, sir." "Why, I don't think you'd hold it against me. I'm disappointed in you. You had that coming, you know it." "Didn't either," so apparently Uncle Jack did spank her. "Honey, you can't go around calling people—" "You ain't fair." I said, "You ain't fair." Uncle Jack's eyebrows went up. "Not fair? How not?" "You're real nice, Uncle Jack, and I reckon I love you even when what you did, but you don't understand children much." Uncle Jack put his hands in his hips, looked down at me, and, "Why do I not understand children, Miss Jean Louise? Such conduct as yours required little understanding. It is obstreperous, disorderly, and abusive." "You got to give me a chance to tell you. I don't mean to sass you. I'm just trying to tell you." Uncle Jack sat down on the bed. His eyebrows came together and he peered at me from under them. "Proceed," he said. I took a deep breath. "Well, in the first place, you never stopped to give me a chance to tell you my side of it. You just lit right into me. When Jim and I fuss, Atticus doesn't ever just listen to Jim's side of it. He hears mine too. And in the second place, you told me never to use words like that except in extreme provocation. And Francis provoked me enough to knock his block off." Uncle Jack scratched his head. "Okay, what was your side of it, Scout?" "Francis called Atticus something, and I wasn't about to take it off of him." What did Francis call him?" "A nigger lover. I ain't very sure what it means, but the way Francis said it—" "Tell you one thing right now, Uncle Jack. I swear before God if I'll sit here and let him say something about Atticus." "He called Atticus that?" "Yes, sir, he did, and a lot more. Said Atticus would be the ruination of the family, and he let Jim and me run wild." From the look on Uncle Jack's face, I thought I was in for it again. When he said, "We'll see about this," I knew Francis was in for it. "I've a good mind to go out there tonight." "Please, sir, just let it go, please." "I've no intention of letting it go," he said. "Alexandra should know about this. The idea of— wait till I get my hands on that boy." Uncle Jack, please promise me something. Please, sir, promise you won't tell Atticus about this. He asked me one time not to let anything I heard about him make me mad, and I'd rather him think we were fighting about something else instead. Please promise. But I don't like Francis getting away with something like that. He didn't. You reckon you could tie up my hand? It's still bleeding some. Of course I will, baby. I know of no hand I would more delighted to tie up. Will you come this way? Uncle Jack gallantly bowed me to the bathroom. While he cleaned and bandaged my knuckles, he entertained me with a tale about a funny nearsighted old gentleman who had a cat named Hodge, and who counted all the cracks on the sidewalk when he went into town. There now, he said, you'll have a very unladylike scar on your wedding ring finger. Thank you, Uncle Jack. Ma'am? What's a whore, lady? Uncle Jack plunged into another long tale about an old prime minister who sat in the House of Commons and blew feathers in the air and tried to keep them there when all about him men were losing their heads. I guess he was trying to answer my question, but he made no sense whatsoever. Later, when I was supposed to be in bed, I went down the hall for a drink of water and heard Atticus and Uncle Jack in the living room. I shall never marry Atticus. Well, why? Oh, I might have children. Atticus said, you've a lot to learn, Jack. I know. Your daughter gave me my first lesson this afternoon. She said I didn't understand children much and told me why. She was quite right, Atticus. She told me how I should have treated her. Oh, dear, I'm sorry I romped on her. Atticus chuckled. She earned it, so don't feel too remorseful. I waited on tenterhooks for Uncle Jack to tell Atticus my side of it, but he didn't. He simply murmured, her use of bathroom invective leaves nothing to the imagination, but she doesn't know the meaning of half of what she says. She asked me what a whore lady was. Did you tell her? No, I told her about Lord Melbourne. Jack, when a child asks you something, answer him for goodness sake, but don't make a production of it. Children are children, but they can spot an evasion quicker than adults. An evasion simply muddles them. No, my father mused, you had the right answer this afternoon, but the wrong reasons. Bad language is a stage all children go through, and it dies with time when they learn they're not attracting attention with it. Hot-headedness isn't. Scout's got to learn to keep her head and learn soon with what's in store for her these next few months. She's coming along, though. Jim's getting older, and she follows his example a good bit now. All she needs is assistance sometimes. Atticus, you've never laid a hand on her? I admit that. So far, I've been able to get by with threats, Jack. She minds me as well as she can. Doesn't come up to scratch half the time, but she tries. That's not the answer, said Uncle Jack. No, the answer is she knows. I know she tries. That's what makes the difference. What bothers me is that she and Jim will have to absorb some ugly things pretty soon. I'm not worried about Jim keeping his head, but Scout just as soon jump on someone as look at him if it's her pride at stake. I waited for Uncle Jack to break his promise. He still didn't. Atticus, how bad is this going to be? You haven't had too much chance to discuss it. Well, it couldn't be worse, Jack. The only thing we've got is a black man's word against the Yules. The evidence boils down to you did, I didn't. The jury couldn't possibly be expected to take Tom Robinson's word against the Yules. Are you acquainted with the Yules? Uncle Jack said yes, he remembered them. He described them to Atticus, and Atticus said, well, you're a generation off, but the present ones are the same, though. What are you going to do then? Before I'm through, I intend to jar the jury a bit. I think we have a reasonable chance on appeal, though. I really can't tell at this stage, Jack. You know, I'd hoped to get through life without a cause of this kind, but John Taylor pointed at me and said, you're it. Let this cup pass from you, hey? You're right. But do you think I could face my children otherwise? You know what's going to happen as well as I do, Jack, and I hope and pray I can get Jim and Scout through it without bitterness and most of all without catching Makeham's usual disease. Why reasonable people go stark raving mad when anything involves a Negro comes up is something I don't pretend to understand. I just hope that Jim and Scout come to me for their answers instead of listening to the town. I hope they trust me enough. Jean Louise? My scalp jumped. I stuck my head around the corner. Sir? Go to bed. I scurried to my room and went to bed. Uncle Jack was a prince of a fellow not to let me down, but I never figured out how Atticus knew I was listening. And it was not until many years later that I realized he wanted me to hear every word he said. My mother used to do that. She'd be on the telephone, supposed to be talking to my aunts. I don't think anybody was on the line. And she would be telling them things. And what she really wanted to do was tell me things because she knew I was listening in. Now the Yules. If I consult all my Post-it notes here, I find the Yules mentioned on page 40 and 41. And here's what it has to say about the Yules. The Yules had been the disgrace of Macomb for 3 generations. None of them had done an honest day's work in his recollection. He said that some Christmas when he was getting rid of the tree, he would take me with him and show me where and how they lived. They were people, but they lived like animals. And then he says, there are ways of keeping them in force, but it's silly to force people like the Yules into a new environment. In other words, forcing them to go to school. And then Scout mentions that it was against the law, and he says, yeah, it's against the law, all right, and it's certainly bad, but when a man spends his relief checks, that would be like welfare, on green whiskey, his children have to find a way of crying from hunger pains. I don't know of any landowner around here who begrudges those children any game their father can hit. He hunts out of season. And that was one of the laws that Scout said that they broke. So they are, I would say, kind of a trashy family. Very poor. Dad drinks. I didn't hear any word of mom. The kids run wild, but they're hungry a lot too. And they have nobody to teach them how to live right. And so it continues generation after generation. Okay, that's all for now. Bye-bye.